train's whistle sliced through the damp evening air, a sharp, mournful cry that reverberated off the soot-streaked brick walls of the city's central station. Alina, 45, stood on the platform, her chestnut hair catching the faint, jaundiced glow of sodium lights overhead. It was a vision of quiet elegance. High cheekbones framed a face that still turned heads. A tailored gray coat hugged her curves, and her hazel eyes carried the weight of a life meticulously assembled. A husband of 20 years, 2 teenage kids who barely looked up from their phones, a mortgage that gnawed at their savings, and a desk job shuffling papers for a faceless corporation. Her hands, still smooth despite the years, clutched a leather overnight bag, nails painted a muted burgundy, a rare indulgence. Night, though, was different. A last-minute work trip had yanked her from the suffocating monotony of folding laundry and reheating leftovers, thrusting her onto a 46-hour train ride across the country. She adjusted her silk scarf, her breath fogging in the late autumn chill, and stepped aboard the clattering beast of steel and secrets. The platform faded behind her, swallowed by shadows, and with it, the woman she'd been. Little did she know, this journey would unravel her in ways she'd never confess, not to her husband, not to the mirror, not to anyone. Before we jump in, real quick, most of you who enjoy these videos still haven't subscribed. If you're one of them, please take a second to hit that button. It helps with channel growth so much and means more than you know. And if you're already subscribed, thank you. Now, let's begin. Carriage swayed as it lurched forward, pulling away from the station with a groan of metal on metal. Alina settled into her seat, the worn velvet upholstery prickling against her thighs through her pencil skirt. She exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, letting the rhythmic hum of the train seep into her bones. The city lights smeared into streaks of gold and red beyond the smudged window, a fleeting tapestry of urban life she rarely paused to notice. Fingers brushed the armrest, tracing the frayed threads, and she felt a strange relief, an escape from the endless cycle of school runs and polite, distracted kisses from Mark, her husband. That's when she felt it, a prickle on the back of her neck, an instinct older than reason. Someone was watching. She glanced up, casual at first, then froze. Across the aisle, a man sat slouched in his seat mid-30s, unshaven, with dark, hooded eyes that lingered too long. His jaw was sharp, his frame broad beneath a faded denim jacket, and a faint scar curved above his left eyebrow, giving him a roguish edge. Her pulse quickened, a traitor to her composure. She looked away, focusing on the window, but the heat of his gaze stayed with her, a silent promise of something dangerous, something alive. Hey, if you're already hooked, smash that like button and subscribe. We're just getting started. The first hour crawled by in a blur of restless thoughts. Mark's voice echoed in her mind, his distracted, "Have a safe trip," as he scrolled through his phone that morning. Her daughter's eye roll when she'd asked about homework. Her son's grunt from behind his gaming headset. The monotony she'd left behind pressed against her chest, heavy and familiar. She needed air, space, something to shake off the weight. Flipping out of her seat, she smoothed her skirt and made her way down the narrow corridor, heels clicking against the linoleum. The train rocked gently, a living thing beneath her feet. She reached the bathroom at the end of the car, a cramped, utilitarian space with a flickering fluorescent bulb and a mirror streaked with fingerprints. She locked the door, the click loud in the confined silence, and leaned over the chipped sink. Cold water splashed against her face, jolting her senses, droplets clinging to her lashes. She pressed her palms to her cheeks, staring at her reflection, faint lines around her eyes, a flush she hadn't noticed before. Who was this woman looking back at her? Knock rattled the door, sharp and insistent. Her heart lurched, a rabbit caught in a snare. She hesitated, then opened it a crack, peering out. It was him, the man from across the aisle, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, his presence overwhelming the tiny space. Up close, he smelled faintly of cedar and sweat, a raw, masculine scent that made her head swim. "Mind if I join you?" His voice was low, gravelly, laced with a smirk that dared her to say no. Before she could form a response, he stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that echoed in her chest. The air thickened, charged with something unspoken. He was close, too close, his breath warm against her ear as he murmured, "You looked like you needed company." Her mind screamed no, a chorus of duty and guilt, but her body betrayed her, leaning into the heat radiating from him. His hands found her waist, rough fingers sliding under the hem of her blouse, tracing the soft skin above her hips with a confidence that made her gasp. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of her neck, stubble grazing her like sandpaper. She couldn't. Instead, her hands gripped his shirt, the fabric coarse under her fingers, pulling him closer as his mouth claimed hers, hungry, reckless, tasting of coffee and something darker. The train jolted, a sudden shift that slammed their bodies together, her back hitting the sink with a thud. Cold metal bit into her thighs through her skirt, a stark contrast to the heat of his hands as they roamed higher, pushing her blouse up to expose the curve of her ribs. Her skirt rode up as he lifted her onto the edge of the sink, her legs parting instinctively. His fingers dug into her thighs, possessive, sliding beneath the lace of her underwear with a boldness that made her head spin. He moaned, the sound swallowed by the roar of the tracks, her nails raking his back as he pressed himself against her, fast and desperate. His breath was ragged against her throat, his movements urgent, unapologetic, driving her to a peak she hadn't known she could reach. It was over in minutes, a collision of need and shame that left her breathless, trembling, her lipstick smeared across his jaw. He pulled back, adjusting his jacket with a wink, and slipped out, vanishing into the corridor as if nothing had happened. He stayed there, slumped against the sink, staring at her reflection, flushed cheeks, wild eyes, a stranger to herself. Her chest heaved, her pulse a drumbeat in her ears. The guilt came later, sharp and fleeting, a needle prick against the rush still coursing through her veins. She smoothed her hair, wiped the lipstick from her chin, and stepped back into the carriage, her legs unsteady. The man was back in his seat, eyes fixed on his phone, as if he hadn't just dismantled her world in a 5x5 box of steel and tile. She sank into her seat, the velvet clinging to her damp skin, and tried to breathe. But it wasn't enough to stop her. Not yet. Hours ticked by, the night deepening as the train carved through the urban sprawl, past neon-lit billboards, skeletal cranes, and rows of sodium-lit tenements. Alina couldn't sleep, the memory of the bathroom pulsing in her veins like a second heartbeat. Her skin felt too tight, her thoughts too loud. She needed to move. Grabbing her coat, she wandered to the vestibule, the liminal space between cars, where the wind howled through cracked seals and the floor vibrated beneath her heels. Air was sharp, tinged with diesel and rust, a slap against her flushed face. That's when she saw him, the second man, leaning against the wall, a cigarette glowing between his fingers, despite the faded no smoking sign above his head. He was younger, maybe 28, with tousled dark hair and a leather jacket that smelled of rain and rebellion. His eyes flicked to her, green and piercing, and he flicked the cigarette away, the ember arcing into the darkness beyond the glass. "Lost?" he asked, his voice teasing, a lilt that curled around her like smoke. She shook her head, but her lips parted, betraying her with a soft, involuntary sound. He grinned, predatory, and closed the distance in 2 strides. Good. His hands were on her before she could think, pinning her against the rattling glass of the door with a force that stole her breath. City lights flashed outside, red, blue, gold, a kaleidoscope of color painting their bodies as he kissed her, hard and possessive, tasting of tobacco and sin. Her coat fell open, the silk lining brushing her skin as his fingers roamed, tugging at her blouse until buttons popped free, scattering across the floor like tiny confessions. The cold air hit the swell of her breasts, her bra a fragile barrier against his touch. She arched into him, the risk of being caught, a passenger stepping out, a conductor rounding the corner, igniting her senses like gasoline on a flame, growled against her throat, a low animal sound, his hands sliding down to grip her hips, lifting her until her legs wrapped around his waist. The train lurched, and he stumbled, pressing her harder against the glass, the surface cool and unyielding against her spine. His mouth moved lower, teeth grazing the edge of her bra as his fingers slipped beneath her skirt, tracing the line of her thigh with a roughness that made her gasp. Friction of their clothes was a maddening tease, his hardness pressing against her through the fabric, driving her to the edge without crossing it. Her gasps mingled with the wind, her body trembling as he pushed her higher, stopping just short of the abyss. He pulled back, smirking, his hair falling into his eyes as he adjusted his jacket. "See you around," he said, voice thick with amusement, and left her there disheveled, aching, alive, her blouse gaping, her breath fogging the glass. He slid to the floor, knees weak, and pressed her forehead to the cold window. The city blurred past, indifferent to her unraveling. Her fingers fumbled to rebutton her blouse, but one was missing, a casualty of her recklessness. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound, and pulled her coat tighter, the silk lining a whisper against her skin. Back in her seat, she stared at the ceiling, the hum of the train, a lullaby she couldn't trust. Sleep eluded her, replaced by a restless energy that coiled tighter with every mile. The second day, Alina was a live wire, every nerve buzzing with the thrill of her descent. The sun rose over the city's edge, casting long shadows through the carriage, but she barely noticed. She slept in fits, her dreams a tangle of hands and mouths, her body waking with a hunger she couldn't name. She changed into a fresh blouse, cream silk, a touch too sheer, and caught her reflection in the window. Tousled hair, lips swollen from biting them, eyes bright with something feral. The conductor had been watching her all morning. His name tag read Victor, a wiry man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair, and a uniform that clung to his lean frame. His hands were calloused, his movements precise as he checked tickets, but his eyes, gray and steady, held a quiet intensity that made her squirm. She caught him staring earlier, his gaze lingering on the curve of her neck, the way her skirt hugged her hips as she crossed her legs. It wasn't overt, but it was there, a thread of interest she couldn't ignore. And he knocked on her compartment door that afternoon, offering a cup of tea. She knew it wasn't just tea he was bringing. The compartment was small, 2 narrow bunks, a fold-down table, a window streaked with rain from the night before. "Long trip," he said, stepping inside and closing the door with a soft click. His voice was steady, accented faintly, but his gaze roamed her body, her rumpled blouse, her skirt riding up as she sat on the lower bunk, one leg crossed over the other. "You look restless." She swallowed, her throat dry, and nodded, the motion small but enough. He set the tea on the table, the steam curling upward, and his hand brushed her knee, a deliberate, electric touch that made her breath catch. "I can help with that," he said, his tone matter-of-fact, but his eyes darkened with intent. He didn't resist as he knelt before her, his hands sliding up her thighs with a gentleness that belied the hunger in his expression. The calluses on his fingers rasped against her skin, a delicious friction as he parted her legs, slow and deliberate. He kissed her inner thigh, his lips warm, his stubble grazing her like a promise. Her head tipped back, a soft whimper escaping as he worked his way higher, tugging her skirt up to her hips. Air was cool against her exposed skin, but but his breath was hot, a contrast that made her shiver. He hooked a finger under her underwear, pulling it aside with a practiced ease, and his tongue found her slow, precise, relentless. Her fingers tangled in his hair, the strands coarse under her grip as he teased her, drawing gasps and shudders she couldn't stifle. The compartment walls were thin, the muffled clatter of the train barely masking her cries. Someone could knock, a passenger could complain, but the risk only sharpened the sensation, her body arching off the bunk as he pushed her higher. When she shattered, it was sudden and overwhelming, a wave that left her trembling, her nails digging into his scalp. He stood, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He adjusted his cap, the gesture casual, and left without a word, the door clicking shut behind him. She lay there, chest heaving, staring at the ceiling as the train rocked beneath her. The tea sat untouched, cold now, a silent witness to her fall. She pulled her skirt down, her hands shaking, and sat up, catching her reflection in the window hair a mess, blouse clinging to her damp skin. A woman she didn't recognize. The shame was there, a dull ache, but it was drowned by the pulse of something else, freedom, raw and unfiltered. Train rolled on, the cityscape giving way to distant suburbs as the 46th hour approached. Alina sat by the window, her reflection a mosaic of desire and doubt fractured by the glass. She'd crossed lines she couldn't uncross, tasted a freedom she hadn't known she craved. The men were gone, strangers who'd claimed pieces of her and vanished into the rhythm of the journey, but the hunger lingered, a live thing coiled in her chest. He thought of Mark, his steady hands and predictable silences, and wondered if he'd see it in her eyes when she returned. The brakes squealed, a high-pitched wail, and the station loomed ahead, platforms bustling with travelers, lights cutting through the dusk. She stood, smoothing her coat, her bag heavy in her hand. Would she step off this train the same woman who'd boarded it, the wife and mother who'd packed lunches and paid bills? Or had she left that Alina behind, scattered across the bathroom sink, the vestibule glass, and the conductor's knowing hands? The train shuddered to a stop, the doors hissing open. She paused at the threshold, the cool air rushing in, and glanced back at the empty compartment. A smile flickered across her lips, small, secret, dangerous. The story doesn't end here. What happens next is up to you.